Parents of Reddit, what is the most disturbing thing your child has done? Not a parent, but me freaking my parents out. My mom used to get migraines a lot when I was little. I had a small stuffed animal named Peaches, and I guess I was scared or nervous about my mom's health and trying to deal with it because apparently I decided that Peaches got a lot of migraines too. This went on for a while. I had to take care of Peaches because he always had headaches. I must have been 4 or 5 at the time. Then someone left the TV on by accident and I saw a news segment about acupuncture. I was overjoyed and went into my mom's sewing kit and stuck a whole bunch of push pins deep into Peach's head. Nobody noticed right away, and I think it was a few days later when my mom or dad saw me carrying Peaches around and noticed a shitton of needles crammed in there. My uncle asked me why I did that and I was calm and content when I looked at him, shrugged, and said Peaches doesn't have headaches anymore. Since he didn't know the backstory, according to him it was the creepiest thing I've ever said, like a little pig-tailed psychopath. It took my parents a bit of digging to figure out my rationale and where it came from, and that I'd been trying to fix, not kill, my favorite stuffed animal. It was pretty straightforward for them to explain. No, never do that, but hopefully they moved the sewing kit to a higher shelf anyway. When my son was 12 or 13 he started walking in his sleep. I found him in his closet one night. He would also come in my room and I would find him either sleeping on the floor by the side of my bed or he'd just be standing next to my bed, eyes open but sound asleep. It happened so often I was afraid he would really hurt himself if he fell down the stairs. I had a friend who was a psychologist, so I mentioned it to him to see if I needed to get him into therapy or have him seen by a doctor. He asked a few questions and once I told him he was 13 he nodded his head and told me my son was probably starting into puberty. That all the hormones that were racing through his body were causing some havoc with his sleep. He said it was nothing to worry about and it would stop in a few months. He was right. 3 or 4 months later, I realized he had stopped sleepwalking and his voice had changed. I engineered the perfect storm the other night. My daughter was sick. She picked up a cold from either school, or her dad's, or manifested it because kids are germ factories. Nothing serious, just some post-nasal drip leading to a mild cough. She got over it with the help of Mucinex. But we have this thing. When she's sick, we get ice cream. Yes, I know dairy is bad because mucus, so I had avoided it, but after a week her cough was few and far between, and sounded productive, so I thought, a small milkshake, right? That should be fine, right? Except she slammed that shit down like it was the sweet ambrosia of the gods. It was there, then it was gone. I thought nothing of it. This girl likes ice cream. Bedtime rolls around, she says her tummy is upset. I tell her to get in bed, lay down, it'll help her feel better. As soon as she lays down she just crashes. Head hits the pillow and it's light out. I should take a moment to mention that she sleeps on the top bunk of a bunk bed. Times is tough, so we share a room, I'm bottom bunk. I get in bed, curl up with my phone, and settle in to read some AskReddit threads. I have an addiction. About 10 minutes in, I've already taken my meds for the night so my head is getting fuzzy, and she starts to cough. I stand on my bed and try to prop her up so her sinuses don't drain too bad, then gag her and trigger more coughing, but she's not having it. I did get her to stop coughing though, so I lay back down. Then she starts coughing again. I stand up, I'm trying to soothe her, to get her to sit up and have a sip of water, but, if you read my other comment here, she has some wild night terrors and does not wake up. Finally, she's coughing so hard she starts to gag herself with the cough. You know the ones, those deep coughs that catch in the back of your throat and try to bring your stomach up with it. Yeah, but her stomach was still full of milkshake. I try to lean her forward, in my mind if she puked on one of her blankets, they're small, easy to wash, maybe 2 hours tops. Nope. She flops to the side, head over the rail of her bed, and lets loose a torrent of Aria milkshake straight onto my weight blanket, comforter, and sheets. She's a good 3 feet above my bed, too, so when it hits it splatters. On the wall, on the pillows, just everywhere. I resign myself to my fate, and gently pat her back, encouraging her to get it up, then take a drink. She was clean, pristine. My legs up to the knee were speckled with puke, my bed was a disaster area, and my head was spinning from my meds. She then went straight back to sleep, I don't think she even woke up, because she didn't remember a thing in the morning, and asked, "What happened to all your blankets?" When she saw the bare mattress, I had no energy to dress. Was having a house party a few months ago. My friends came over and brought their kids. My wife got a bouncy house for them to play on. All the adults were inside eating food and chatting. Some of the kids were outside playing on the bouncy house. I realized that at least one adult should be out there with them, so I left the adults and wandered outside. As I was getting closer to where the kids were playing, I started hearing some rhythmic chanting coming from their direction. I got suspicious, so I decided to sneak up on them and see what they were doing. 4 of the children were holding hands and bouncing in a circle in the middle of the bouncy house, chanting "Evil rules! Evil rules! Evil rules!" I stood there in amazement for a minute, trying to figure out what game they were playing. One of the girls in the group suddenly looked in my direction and screamed, "Oh no, he's here! Run!" All the children scattered and ran away. To this day, my son still won't tell me what they were doing. Sad face. My daughter told me about her imaginary friend, details, dress color, hair color, on and on and on. I stood there saying, "Oh, that's neat," at 3 a.m. trying to coax her back to sleep. Then she said, "Oh, she says she knows you. Her name is Misha." Growing up, I also had an imaginary friend named Misha. Instantly awake. She fell back to sleep a little later and I figured it was a fluke. Couple of months later, Mom gave me a box of drawings she'd found cleaning out the closet from when I was young, 3 or 4, and while going through them my daughter grabs my arm and says, "See, Misha," and pointed to a drawing I'd done from school titled "My Friends." Same color dress, yellow, same hair color, reddish black. Nearly shit myself. I don't believe in the supernatural, and nothing remotely like this has happened since in the 4 years since this happened, and her imaginary friend has come and gone, but her sister is turning 3 and I'm waiting for the name again. I don't remember the girl I used to play with in the woods by my childhood house, but my daughter had backstory that sounded very familiar. I'd try to press her for details when all this was going on, and my daughter would just giggle and say, "You know, Dada, you just forgot. That's okay," and pat my arm and walk away. I'm 13 years older than my sister, so I basically functioned as a third parent, and I've always thought she was a touch off. When she was about 4 or 5, she had a phase where she kept tying her toys together. I'd come in a room she had been playing in, and she'd have a string wrapped around a toy horse's neck, then wrapped around a lamp, then wrapped around a doll's neck, then wrapped around a chair leg, and there'd be several strings and ropes tied in this way. Literally the entire room would be a web of toys and strings. It looked like a child's version of a Saw movie, and it was a pain in the ass to help her clean up. One day when I was watching her, I told her not to do it. She agreed, and then I came back in not too long after and she had somehow done it anyway. She was sitting in a chair looking at me indirectly, like she was nervous. I was irritated and asked her why she did it after she said she wouldn't, and she said the most future serial killer sentence I have ever heard. Sometimes I just do things and I don't really understand why I'm doing them. I was a newly single parent, working on a divorce, first, very small, apartment I achieved on my own, post-separation. I decided to get my kids a cat. My then 5-year-old, who has a few behavioral disorders, ADHD, OD, SPD, PTSD. She's struggling to cope and manage her disorders, so she has to be watched closely at all times. One day she's playing with the cat and I hear the microwave shut. She was not allowed to use any kitchen appliances on her own. So yup, if you guessed she put the cat in the microwave, you're correct. Luckily as soon as I heard it I jumped up and ran. She didn't turn it on, but she did find herself grounded, including from the cat. Another time, almost 2 years ago. Still struggling with all of her behavioral disorders. I had moved into a bigger house, safety plan still in place for said child. We are about to watch a movie or something, and get everything ready, snacks, blankets etc., and child goes missing. She liked to hide in places and not come out until she was found. After searching all of her hiding spots, she's still not found. After about 30 minutes of looking, felt like an eternity, and about 5 minutes before I called 911. She turns up at the front door. Absolutely filthy. Pupils dilated to the size of saucers. Her excuse was the cat wanted to show how he gets in and out from the basement. I have no idea what kind of Narnia-ass wardrobe this cat took her to. Roughly same time, said child liked to draw, paint, and color. One day she brings me some of her artwork. But this time, it is a story, or some sort of lyrics. At this time she was behind academically and didn't know how to read, or write, or words very well. But here this letter talks about demons and how lost she would be without me. Some scary, eye-catching stuff coming from your young child. I kept this letter, to remind all of us how far she's come. Hard times do get better. Needless to say, safety measures became more strict, psychologist was fired, meds put in place. She is no longer impulsive or defiant to this extent. She's now struggling with sleep paralysis, but we have made phenomenal grounds over the last year. Not apparent, but this was something that would happen to me on specific occasions, mostly when I slept over at a friend's house. I used to sleepwalk, but sometimes at other kids' houses I would wake up and start screaming for either my mom or the name of my friend. Their parents would freak out and come into the hallway where I was screaming. The weirdest part is that I remember being conscious. I remember getting up, screaming a name over and over again, and going back to bed without saying a word to my friend's parents, like nothing ever happened. The next day in the morning was always the same. The parents would ask why I was screaming, but would tell me that I wasn't screaming anybody's name, just screaming in general. I haven't done this in years, but very rarely I still do find myself waking up on the couch without remembering how I got there, when my girlfriend would come wake me up wondering why I wasn't in bed. She was 6 years old and tried to burn her house down super early in the morning when everyone was still asleep. Her parents woke up when the fire alarm went off, because she succeeded in setting the dining room table on fire. My mom explained what happened to me and said that I wouldn't be seeing her as much. She had a habit of hurting me and lying about it and other weird shit, and my mom finally just decided to withdraw because she was obviously disturbed. She would have done it sooner, but I guess I kept begging to see her. The next time I saw that friend I asked her about it and she told me that she didn't like sharing her mom with her stepdad/stepbrother, and so she apparently just jumped straight to murder/suicide. What's worse is the firefighters who responded brought a fucking Dalmatian plush with them and gave it to her after giving her a gentle talking about why arson is bad. My son at 2.5 years old stole my premature newborn daughter out of her bassinet when she was 2 weeks old. Twice. I woke up and heard her crying at 3 a.m. but her bed was empty. So I yell for my husband, jump up and notice the light is on in my son's room. Run in there and he's sitting on the bed with her, she's laying on his bed. She seemed fine, he was trying to explain as well as a 2yo can. Then a couple nights later the same thing happens, except I go into his room and they're not there. He brought her all the way down the hall to our living room and she's on the couch. I tried asking him what happened and he just said yes to everything, even said yes to dropping her on the floor. She seemed unharmed, but how could he even grab her from her bassinet? It went up to his shoulders. He'd have to reach over his head to pull out this tiny 5-pound baby who has a floppy neck. It was so scary thinking about what could have happened to her. We put a lock on his door for a while and made sure he knew he wasn't allowed to carry her. I think he was doing it out of love, but still, so scary. I'm not a parent, but I'll be speaking on my parents' behalf, as I did something pretty disturbing when I was a wee boy, much too young to remember. We were celebrating Christmas at my grandparents' house in Louisiana, and it how it happened, but at some point I gashed my hand wide open. Usually a small child would scream and cry, but apparently I just waddled through the kitchen, completely expressionless, and into the next room over. In said room was a very old Bible, I think it was my great-grandma's. My family noticed my lack of presence in the kitchen and went searching for me. They eventually found me smearing my bloody hand all over the old Bible and tearing its pages to shreds. I'm not religious, but this story has always creeped me out. It what got into me, but I guess I was pretty metal back then. LMAO. The child I was a part-time babysitter for was obsessed with starting fires. So this was not a first-time thing. I smoked, but only when the mom who was my friend at the time was home and able to watch her own kids while we hung out. And never in front of them. So basically once a day if I was around them, and sprayed religiously afterwards. One day she called me and accused me of burning her house down. Her child apparently found a white lighter and the fire took everything. The thing is, I'm into that superstition that white lighters are bad luck and would never be caught dead with one. Eventually she stopped blaming me when I told her about my white lighter superstition and start blaming the neglectful babysitter that was there at the time and blacklisted her, even though the kid admitted he found it in the backyard. To this day I think that whole family was filled with bad apples. She turned out to be crazy as a bat. This probably doesn't count, but it was pretty disturbing a child could cause so much damage at the time. Not my kid, but I was camping with some friends, and I took their 2-year-old for a short walk on the last day to give his folks time to pack everything up without him underfoot. We walked about 50 yards, talking about the colors of leaves and whether squirrels exist, and out of nowhere he calmly tells me, "No one is screaming. No inflection, no meaning. No reason to think this is a good thing or a bad thing. At last, the screaming has stopped. No one is screaming, and I have to do something about that." So I foolishly convinced myself that this was his creepy quota, children of the corn say the darndest things, and move on. He's not gonna be super weird again for the length of the walk. We're out maybe 10 minutes and heading back, the site is in view way down the path, he's counting rocks and starting over every time he gets to 20. And then he stops, looks up at the trees, and says, "I'm all alone in the deep, blue woods. Haha, no buddy, I'm right here with you. Aren't I? Aren't I?" We get back and I'm freaking out and I grab his mother's arm and ask her, "Am I a ghost? You'd tell me if I was a ghost, right?" I'm not a parent, but I definitely disturbed the hell out of my parents, but mostly my mother, without knowing how much I scared them at the time. At around 5 years old, or however old I was in kindergarten, I used to have suicidal thoughts, and knew that if I did kill myself, I'd go to heaven, because I'm a Christian. I can't recall every reason why I'd have them, but I remember sometimes it was because of something bad happening in the moment. The main reason I never went through with it is because I feared the pain of actually cutting my throat with a butcher knife, but I thought about doing it multiple times. I stopped having them because a couple times, I mentioned wanting to kill myself vocally, and I only now know how scared to death that made my mom. Soon after, I remember having a meeting with my mom, dad, and kindergarten teacher, who I adore and is one of the nicest people I know. They told me that it scared my parents, and how sad it would make everybody who knew me if I did go through with it, but for the most part I can't remember the details. I do remember the look on my mom's face, and that scared me from ever thinking about it again. My daughter and I got into a big argument where she eventually pulled out a knife. She never tried to stab me or even got close to me with it, but I called the cops on her anyway. When they questioned her, she briefly accused me of sexual abuse. It was absolutely false. Nothing that could possibly be considered sexual abuse ever happened. She recanted almost immediately. I didn't know about it until after because she was speaking to a police officer privately. She said she was ashamed about it. I was too demoralized to be angry, but I told her I was disappointed and ashamed of her. My 2 other kids got really mad at her about it. It was deeply saddening on many levels. It stunned me that she would stoop so low to think about hurting me with a blatant lie, even if it was only brief. That kind of thing is extremely hurtful to real victims because people lying about abuse unfairly hurts victims' credibility. Sadly, she has struggled with mental illness and there have been a couple of other shocking incidents. Number 2 on the list had nothing to do with me, but it was also very disturbing. As is often true with mental illness, she has occasionally lashed out at other people as a way of coping with her internal pain. It's one of the most painful things I've ever dealt with. It really hurts to see one of your kids in pain. Fortunately, she's been doing better lately. My son pulled out a bag of sandwich hoagie rolls. He was wiggling around to the toaster, and he is one who has historically loved making toast with hot dog buns. I stopped him and told him that this bread was for sandwiches and was too expensive to use for toast. He instantly deflected, spun around saying, I know. He threw them on the table, went to the refrigerator and pulled out meat, cheese, all the fixins, made himself a sandwich that he didn't take one freaking bite of, and then he threw it away when I told him he needed to eat if before the dog got to it 15 minutes later. Instead of grabbing a regular loaf of bread and making toast, he pretended he was always going to make a sandwich, only to literally take additional expensive food out of the fridge and throw it into the garbage to double down on his not making toast. Sorry, I didn't type the whole novel out. I figured the sarcasm was obvious on a most disturbing thing your kid has done post. I figured every last detail was going to ruin the ultimately stupid story's punchline. It's not just the cost of this bread, although the amount of food that gets thrown away in my house to my 3 kids who dish up a full plate and eat 2 bites then dump it in the sink, or food being taken out and left open, it's not just bread and the line has to be drawn. Beyond the cost, it's that we were in a heat wave. Sandwiches are the easy go-to dinner that is filling and delicious without turning anything on or waiting for something to cook. When the special sandwich hoagies are purchased for sandwiches, the same kids that cooked up half the bag of hoagies for toast are the same ones who don't want sandwiches for dinner because they want the good bread that we don't have enough of. Add in 2 of my kids are on the autism spectrum and my 3rd is working towards an ADHD diagnosis. My oldest still craps his pants occasionally, my youngest is still in pull-ups on and off and barely talks at all at 4 years old, and what he does say has to be translated through my wife or I. My other child cannot sit through 5 minutes of class without completely withdrawing because she is so bad at it when her work is ahead of the majority of her class and she gets nothing but praise from us and her teacher. I appreciate the unsolicited advice about the cost of a hoagie, but you can kindly go screw yourself. I'm not oppressing my children keeping the fine dinner hoagies from them at breakfast.